The Crimson Sands of Kethri Prime drank deeply of alien blood as Commander Zara Veltar pressed her back against the jagged crystal formation, her breathing harsh and ragged through her ceremonial war mask. The elegant curves of her traditional Zilani battle armor were scarred and dented, the proud silver gleam now dulled with dust and
Come
gore.
out,
In her
little
trembling
bird.
hands, she held the broken shaft of her ancestral spear, the weapon that had been
Distance
passed
ends
down
here.
through 17
The
generations
Zilani
of her
Empire's
warrior
greatest
lineage,
champion,
now
reduced to
little
hiding
more
behind
than
rocks like a
ceremonial
frightened
stick.
child.
The sound of approaching footsteps crunched across the crystalline battlefield, each step deliberate and mocking. The Korthak hegemony had come in overwhelming force, their black chitinous armor gleaming like beetles under the alien sun. Zara counted at least 30 of the insectoid warriors closing in on her position, their mandibles clicking with anticipation. She had already slain twice that number, but the Korthak seemed endless, pouring from their dropships like a plague of locusts. "Come out, little bird," called Warlord Thax, his voice a wet, chittering sound that made Zara's skin crawl. "Your pathetic resistance ends here." The Zilani Empire's greatest champion, reduced to hiding behind rocks like a frightened child. Zara's golden eyes blazed with defiant fire through the slits of her war mask. The Zilani were a proud people, descended from avian ancestors, and their culture valued honor above life itself. To die in battle was glory. To flee was shame that would stain her family name for generations. But to surrender, that was a concept so alien to her people that they had no word for it in their ancient tongue. She examined her broken spear with bitter irony. The weapon had been forged from the heart of a dying star, its crystalline tip capable of piercing any known armor. Her great-grandmother had wielded it during the liberation of Vexhai. Her mother had carried it in the border wars against the Melody Syndicate. Now it lay in pieces, destroyed by a Korthak warhammer in the opening moments of this hopeless battle. The battle had begun 3 hours ago when Zara's reconnaissance squad had stumbled upon a Korthak forward base hidden in the Crystal Canyons. What should have been a simple intelligence-gathering mission had become a desperate last stand when the Korthak had sprung their trap. Her squad of 12 elite Zilani warriors had been whittled down one by one, each death a personal failure that weighed on her soul like lead. Veltar was her name, which meant wind dancer in the old tongue. Her grandmother had chosen it because Zara had been born during a storm, when the winds of Zelenhai had sung through the crystal spires of their capital city. As a child, she had dreamed of living up to that name, of dancing through battles like wine through the mountains, untouchable and free. Now she was trapped, grounded, her dance ended. The Korthak were methodical hunters, she had to give them that. They moved in perfect coordination, their forearms allowing them to carry multiple weapons while their chitinous exoskeletons provided natural armor that could deflect most conventional weapons. Their technology was crude but effective, powered by brute force rather than elegance. Where the Zilani favored precision and artistry in warfare, the Korthak simply overwhelmed their enemies with superior numbers and firepower. "You fought well, Commander," Warlord Thax continued, his voice growing closer. "Your warriors died with honor. But this planet will belong to the hegemony, as will all the worlds of your failing empire. The galaxy grows tired of your pretty speeches about honor and justice. It hungers for the strength that only we can provide." Zara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the Wind Fathers, the ancient spirits that her people believed guided the souls of warriors to their eternal rest. She had always imagined she would die in glorious battle, perhaps leading a charge against overwhelming odds, her spear finding the heart of some terrible enemy before she herself fell. She had never imagined it would end like this, cornered and alone, her weapon broken, her squad dead. But perhaps there was still one last dance left in her. She reached into her utility pouch and withdrew her last thermal grenade. It was powerful enough to take several Korthak with her, and the honor of her family would remain intact. A warrior's death, even in defeat, was still preferable to capture. The Korthak were not known for their mercy, and the fate that awaited prisoners was worse than death. The footsteps were very close now. She could hear their chittering conversation, the wet sound of their breathing through their spiracles. In a moment, they would round the crystal formation and find her. She would trigger the grenade and at least ensure that her death meant something. "Remember me, Wind Fathers," she whispered, her thumb hovering over the grenade's activation switch. Remember that Zara Veltar did not kneel. But, as she prepared to make her final stand, a sound cut through the air above the battlefield, a sound unlike anything she had ever heard. It was a long, ululating war cry, wild and fierce and utterly alien. It seemed to come from the sky itself, growing louder and more intense until it drowned out even the clicking of Korthak mandibles. Zara looked up, and her eyes widened in shock. Something was falling from the heavens, wreathed in flame and trailing smoke like a meteor. But meteors did not scream war cries, and they certainly did not appear to be wearing some kind of crude armor. As the figure fell, she could see that it was roughly humanoid in shape, with 2 arms and 2 legs, but its proportions were wrong somehow, too broad in the shoulders, too thick in the limbs. The Korthak had noticed the falling figure as well. Their formation broke as they scrambled to track its trajectory, weapons swinging skyward in confusion. Warlord Thax's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation as he barked orders in the harsh Korthak tongue. The figure struck the ground perhaps 50 meters from Zara's position with an impact that shook the crystal formations and sent up a cloud of crimson dust. For a moment, there was absolute silence on the battlefield. Then, from within the dust cloud, came a voice speaking in accented but understandable galactic standard. Well, that was one hell of a ride. The dust began to clear, revealing the fallen figure as it slowly rose to its feet. Zara gasped despite herself. The creature was definitely humanoid, but unlike any species she had ever encountered. Its skin was a pale pink-brown color, and it had actual hair, growing from the top of its head in a wild, unkempt mass. Most shocking of all, it appeared to be wearing primitive armor cobbled together from salvaged materials, and it carried weapons that looked like they had been manufactured in someone's garage. But there was something in its stance, in the way it moved, that made Zara's warrior instincts tingle with recognition. This was a fighter, regardless of its crude equipment or unknown species. The creature, no, the warrior, surveyed the Korthak forces surrounding it with apparent casualness, as if being outnumbered 30-1 was a minor inconvenience rather than certain death. Then, it turned its gaze toward Zara's hiding spot, and she found herself looking into the strangest eyes she had ever seen, blue as a winter sky, bright with intelligence and utterly fearless. The warrior raised its voice so both she and the Korthak could hear. "Name's Marcus Chen, late of the human colonial marines. I couldn't help but notice you folks were having a bit of a disagreement down here." Its gaze fixed on Zara for a moment. "Mind if I join the fight?" The Korthak recovered from their shock first. Warlord Thax chittered what might have been laughter. "Another alien fool come to die for the birdwoman's lost cause. Kill it quickly and be done with this farce." The first wave of Korthak warriors charged forward, their warhammers and plasma rifles trained on the human. Marcus Chen, the name felt strange in Zara's mind, simply stood his ground and smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. In fact, it reminded Zara uncomfortably of the predatory grins of the fell hunters that stalked the crystal caves of her homeworld. "You know," Marcus said conversationally as the Korthak closed in, "I've been having a really bad week. My ship got shot down, I've been eating nothing but emergency rations for 3 days, and I'm pretty sure I pulled something important when I hit the ground just now." He reached behind his back and drew the largest, most intimidating weapon Zara had ever seen. "So I'm feeling just a little bit cranky." The weapon barked thunder, and the lead Korthak warrior simply vanished from the waist up. Zara had seen plasma weapons, railguns, and even the legendary Nova cannons of the Ancient Ones. But this was something else entirely. The sound was like the voice of an angry god, and the effect was devastating beyond anything she could have imagined. The weapon fired projectile after projectile, each one finding its mark with mechanical precision. Korthak armor, which had shrugged off her spear strikes and energy blasts, crumpled like paper before this human's primitive kinetic weapons. But it was not just the firepower that amazed her. It was the way the human moved. Despite his crude equipment and apparent lack of formal training, Marcus Chen fought with a fluidity and adaptability that put even veteran Zalani warriors to shame. He used the crystal formations for cover, bounced grenades off canyon walls to strike enemies behind shelter, and never seemed to be where the Korthak expected him to be. When his primary weapon ran dry, he drew a smaller one and continued firing without missing a beat. When that too was exhausted, he produced a curved blade from seemingly nowhere and waded into melee combat with the remaining Korthak warriors. The sight of him fighting with nothing but a steel knife against armored opponents 3 times his size should have been pathetic. Instead, it was terrifying. Zara found herself moving without conscious thought, drawn into the battle by instincts older than civilization. Her broken spear might be useless as a weapon, but the shaft was still solid enough to serve as a club. She leaped from her hiding place and struck at a Korthak that was trying to flank the human, driving the broken end of her spear into a weak point between its armor plates. Marcus glanced at her as she joined the fray, and his savage grin widened. "Now we're talking. Hope you don't mind the mess, I tend to get a little enthusiastic." Together, they carved through the remaining Korthak with brutal efficiency. Where Zara fought with trained precision and elegant technique, Marcus Chen fought with raw fury and adaptability. He seemed to have no formal style at all, combining elements of a dozen different combat disciplines into something that was uniquely human. When a Korthak grabbed him from behind, he drove his elbow into its throat, spun around, and buried his knife in its eye socket, all in one fluid motion that defied conventional tactics. The last Korthak fell with Warlord Thax himself, the massive creature brought low when Zara distracted him, and Marcus put 3 rounds center mass with a sidearm he had somehow acquired during the battle. The Warlord crashed to the crystalline ground, his mandibles still clicking weakly in death. In the sudden silence that followed, Zara found herself staring at her unlikely savior. Marcus Chen stood among the carnage, breathing hard but apparently uninjured despite having just fought 30 armored opponents with primitive weapons. His crude armor was splattered with Korthak ichor, and his wild hair was even more disheveled than before, but his blue eyes were calm and alert. "Well," he said, reloading one of his weapons with practiced ease, "that was fun." "You all right, Commander?" "Veltar," Zara managed, struggling to find her voice. "Commander Zara Veltar of the Zelani Imperial Guard." Marcus nodded as if this was perfectly normal information. "Good to meet you, Commander. Sorry about your squad, I got here as fast as I could." He gestured at the battlefield around them. "Looks like you gave them hell before I showed up." Zara stared at him in amazement. This creature from a species she had never heard of, spoke as if rescuing stranded alien commanders from overwhelming enemy forces was just another day at the office. How did you know we were in trouble?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "Picked up your distress beacon on my way down. My ship took a hit from a Korthak patrol cruiser about an hour ago, had to punch out before she went critical." He looked around at the crystal formations thoughtfully. This seemed like as good a place as any to make planetfall, and, when I heard shooting, well. He shrugged. "Marines don't leave people behind. Doesn't matter what species they are." The simple matter-of-fact way he said it made something twist in Zara's chest. Here was a warrior from an unknown people, stranded on a hostile planet, who had nonetheless thrown himself into a hopeless battle to save complete strangers. It was the sort of heroism that figured prominently in Zelani legends, but she had never expected to encounter it in reality. "I am in your debt, Marcus Chen," she said formally, placing her fist over her heart in the traditional Zelani gesture of honor bond. "You have saved my life and avenged my fallen warriors. By the codes of my people, I pledge my spear to your service until this debt is repaid." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the formality. "Hey, no debt necessary. We're both stuck on this rock until extraction arrives, right? Might as well stick together." He paused, studying her broken spear with interest. "Though we might want to see about getting you a new weapon. That thing looks like it's seen better days." Zara looked down at the shattered remains of her family's ancestral spear and felt the weight of 17 generations of warrior tradition pressing down on her shoulders. "It is beyond repair," she admitted quietly. "The weapon of my lineage, destroyed by Korthak savagery." To her surprise, Marcus's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I know what it means to lose something that important." He was quiet for a moment, then, his face lit up with sudden inspiration. "Actually, you know what? I might be able to help with that. Before I joined the Marines, I was a fabrication engineer. If you've got the broken pieces and I can find some decent salvage." He gestured at the fallen Korthak warriors. "These bug boys are carrying some pretty sophisticated alloys. Might not be traditional, but I bet we could build you something that would make your ancestors proud. Zara felt hope stir in her chest for the first time since the battle began. You would do this? For someone you have only just met? Marcus grinned, and this time there was no predatory edge to the expression, just genuine warmth. Commander, something tells me we're going to be working together for a while. Might as well make sure you're properly equipped for whatever comes next. He looked up at the alien sky, where the shapes of more Korthak ships could be seen approaching in the distance. Because unless I'm very much mistaken, the party's just getting started. The abandoned Korthak mining facility squatted in the crystal canyon like a metallic tumor, its dark towers and processing equipment casting long shadows in the dying light of Kethri Prime's twin suns. Marcus Chen crouched at the canyon's edge, studying the facility through a pair of salvaged Korthak optics while Zara Veltar worked on her new weapon beside him. 3 days had passed since their first encounter, and, in that time the unlikely pair had become an efficient team. Marcus had kept his promise about the spear, combining the shattered remains of Zara's ancestral weapon with Korthak alloys and human engineering to create something entirely new. The result was a work of art that would have made both their peoples proud, a telescoping staff that could extend to traditional spear length, tipped with a monomolecular edge that could cut through almost anything. But it was more than just a weapon. Marcus had incorporated salvaged Korthak power cells and shield generators into the design, giving the spear capabilities that no traditional Zalani weapon had ever possessed. Zara was still learning to use all of its functions, but she was already more formidable than she had ever been with the original. 14 guards on the perimeter, Marcus reported quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the crystal formations. Heavy weapons emplacements at each corner, and at least 2 patrol groups doing regular sweeps. They're being careful. Zara adjusted her new armor, another of Marcus's creations, built from salvaged materials but incorporating design principles from both their civilizations. Where her traditional ceremonial gear had been elegant but fragile, this hybrid equipment was built for war. The facility contains enough processed crystals to power a fleet, she said. If the Korthak establish a permanent foothold here, they will be able to launch strikes against the entire sector. Marcus nodded grimly. Which is why we need to blow it up before their reinforcements arrive. He had spent the morning rigging explosives from salvaged components, creating demolition charges that would reduce the facility to radioactive ash. Problem is, getting close enough to plant the charges without being spotted. They had been playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with Korthak forces across the planet for the past 3 days. The arrival of the human had disrupted the aliens' carefully planned invasion, forcing them to divert resources to hunt down what they initially assumed was a single-stranded enemy. When that single enemy had proceeded to destroy 2 patrol groups and a communications relay with apparent ease, the Korthak had started taking the threat more seriously. But they were still thinking in conventional terms. They deployed search grids and established checkpoints, trying to catch Marcus and Zara through overwhelming force and superior numbers. What they failed to understand was that humans had been fighting guerrilla wars for thousands of years, and Marcus Chen was very good at his job. There is another way, Zara said thoughtfully, studying the facility layout. The thermal exhaust system. These mining operations require massive heat dissipation, and the Korthak are not known for changing designs that work. If the layout is standard, there should be service tunnels that bypass the main security grid. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You've done this before? During the border wars with the Melody Syndicate, my unit specialized in striking enemy installations behind their lines. Zara's golden eyes gleamed with old memories. The Melody used similar mining technology. We learned to exploit its weaknesses. I like the way you think, Marcus said with approval. Can you get us inside? Zara was quiet for a moment, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Working with Marcus had been a revelation in more ways than one. Where Zalani military doctrine emphasized honor and direct confrontation, the human seemed to have no qualms about using stealth, deception, and what her people would consider underhanded tactics. Initially, she had been disturbed by his approach. Now, after seeing its effectiveness, she was beginning to understand that there were many forms of honor. The service tunnels will be cramped and heavily shielded, she warned. If we are discovered while inside, there will be no escape route. Marcus grinned that predatory grin of his. Story of my life. Besides, that's what makes it exciting. They waited until full darkness before making their move. Ketheri Prime's twin moons cast an eerie silver light across the crystal landscape, creating a maze of shadows and reflections that could hide an army. Marcus and Zara moved through this alien terrain with the fluid grace of born predators, their hybrid equipment allowing them to avoid Korthak sensors while maintaining perfect coordination. The thermal exhaust system was exactly where Zara had predicted, a series of heavily shielded tunnels that channeled superheated air from the mining operations deep underground. The entrance was protected by automated defenses, but Marcus had learned a thing or two about Korthak technology during their running battle across the planet. Their security systems are powerful but inflexible, he explained quietly as he worked on the access panel with tools jury-rigged from salvaged components. They rely on overwhelming force rather than adaptability. Once you understand their programming logic, you can usually find a way around it. The lock clicked open with a soft chime, and Marcus gestured for Zara to take point. The Zalani commander slipped into the tunnel system with liquid grace, her enhanced spear collapsed to its shortest configuration to avoid catching on the narrow walls. Marcus followed close behind, his bulkier frame making the tight quarters even more challenging. The tunnels were a maze of branching passages and service shafts, all glowing with the residual heat of the mining operations below. The air was thick and oppressive, filled with the chemical smell of processed crystals and industrial lubricants. But Zara navigated the system with the confidence of someone who had done this before, leading them deeper into the facility's heart. "Tell me about your people," Marcus whispered as they paused at a junction to let a maintenance drone pass. "The Zalani Empire, how long have you been spacefaring?" Zara was surprised by the question. In the heat of battle and survival, there had been little time for personal conversation. "Nearly 3,000 standard years," she replied quietly. "We achieved interstellar flight during what your translators would call the Age of Windsongs. My people value honor, justice, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. We have built an empire based on these principles." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sounds like a good way to live. What's your role in all this?" "I am commander of the 3rd Talon, an elite unit tasked with reconnaissance and rapid response missions. We serve directly under the Windcaller, what you might call an emperor, though the title doesn't translate well." Zara's voice carried a note of pride despite their circumstances. "My family has served the Empire for 17 generations. We are sworn to defend the weak and uphold the ancient codes." 17 generations, Marcus repeated with something like awe. "That's incredible. My family's military tradition goes back maybe 4 generations, and that's considered exceptional where I come from." They reached another junction, this one leading toward the facility's central power core. Zara held up a hand for silence as she extended her enhanced senses, listening for any sign of enemy presence. The tunnels seemed clear, but something felt wrong. The air circulation patterns had changed, and there was a subtle vibration in the walls that hadn't been there before. "We are not alone," she whispered. Marcus's hand moved to his sidearm without conscious thought. "How many?" "Unknown. But they know we are here." Zara's grip tightened on her collapsed spear. "This feels like a trap." Before Marcus could respond, the tunnel section behind them sealed with a hiss of pneumatic locks. Then, the section ahead did the same, trapping them in a small chamber with nowhere to go. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in harsh red illumination. "Clever little aliens," came a familiar chittering voice over the facility's communication system. It was Warlord Thax's second-in-command, a massive Korthak named Hextal who had survived their first encounter by being elsewhere when the shooting started. "Did you really think we wouldn't learn from our previous encounters? The thermal tunnels were a good choice, we expected you to try something like this eventually." More seals activated, further subdividing their small section of tunnel. They were completely trapped now, locked in a metal box deep underground with no apparent way out. Zara felt a familiar cold dread settling in her stomach. This was exactly the sort of situation that had gotten her squad killed in the first place. But Marcus didn't seem concerned. If anything, he looked almost pleased by this turn of events. You know what, Hex? I was getting tired of the sneaking around anyway. He began unpacking something from his equipment harness, a series of small devices that Zara didn't recognize. Thanks for saving me the trouble of finding you. You are trapped, human, Hextall chittered with obvious satisfaction. The tunnel section you occupy can be filled with toxic gas, superheated steam, or simply depressurized. Your deaths will be slow and painful, as befits those who dare challenge the hegemony. Marcus finished assembling his device, some sort of shaped charge, Zara realized with growing excitement. Here's the thing about humans, Bug Boy, he said conversationally while he worked. We've been in tight spots before. Hell, my great-grandfather fought in the siege of New Stalingrad, where they held off an entire alien fleet with nothing but small arms and pure bloody-mindedness. My grandfather was at the Battle of the Void Gate, where they turned a supply convoy into a fleet killer through sheer audacity. He placed the charges against the tunnel wall with practiced precision. And my father was at the defense of Terra, where humanity proved that we don't know when to quit. He looked up at the communication speaker with cold blue eyes. We've been surrounded before, Hex. We've been outnumbered and outgunned and left for dead. But, you know what we've never been? The charges detonated with a thunderous roar that shook the entire facility. The tunnel wall simply vanished, revealing the facility's main processing chamber beyond a vast space filled with crystal refinement equipment and, more importantly, a dozen very surprised Korthak technicians. Defeated, Marcus finished as he and Zara leaped through the breach. What followed was less a battle than a masterclass in adaptive combat tactics. Marcus and Zara moved through the processing chamber like deadly dancers, their different fighting styles complementing each other perfectly. Where Zara's enhanced spear carved through enemy armor with elegant precision, Marcus's improvised weapons created chaos and confusion that the Korthak couldn't adapt to quickly enough. But the real revelation came when they reached the facility's central control room. Hextall was waiting for them there, along with a squad of his best warriors. The Korthak sub-commander was even larger than Warlord Thax had been, his chitinous armor decorated with the bones of fallen enemies. He wielded a massive plasma cannon that could have taken out a small building. End of the line, aliens, he chittered triumphantly. This chamber is shielded against your primitive explosives. There is nowhere left to run. Marcus and Zara exchanged a look. Then, to Hextall's obvious confusion, they both began to smile. You know what your problem is? Marcus said, reaching for something on his equipment belt. You keep thinking in terms of conventional warfare. But, humans fight dirty. The object in his hand was small and innocuous looking, but Zara recognized it immediately. A personal shield generator, modified with Korthak power cells and human ingenuity. Not powerful enough to stop heavy weapons fire, but more than sufficient for what Marcus had in mind. Zara, remember what we practiced yesterday? She nodded, her spear extending to full length with a soft chime. The monomolecular edge began to glow with stored energy. Marcus activated the shield generator and threw it directly at Hextall. The Korthak commander's plasma cannon tracked the small device automatically, firing a blast that should have vaporized it instantly. Instead, the energy was absorbed by the shield matrix and reflected back in a focused beam that struck the chamber's main power coupling. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but, by then, Zara was already moving. She had spent the past 3 days learning to fight in partnership with Marcus, adapting her traditional Zolani techniques to complement his unconventional human tactics. In the brief moment of darkness, she became the wind itself, untouchable, unstoppable, deadly. When the lights came back on, Hextall was on the ground with Zara's spear through his primary heart. His warriors were scattered around the chamber, victims of Marcus's brutal efficiency in close-quarters combat. That, Marcus said with satisfaction as he began placing his demolition charges around the control room, is what we in the business call thinking outside the box. Zara withdrew her spear and watched the human work with growing admiration. In just 3 days, he had taught her more about adaptive combat than she had learned in 15 years of formal military training. More than that, he had shown her that there were many ways to serve honor and justice, not all of them found in ancient codes and traditional teachings. Your people, she said thoughtfully as they prepared to evacuate the facility. They sound formidable. Marcus paused in his work to look at her. We're survivors, mostly. We've had to learn to adapt because the universe keeps throwing impossible situations at us. He grinned that familiar predatory grin. But we're also stubborn as hell, and we don't abandon our friends. Ever. The demolition charges were set to detonate in 10 minutes, giving them just enough time to reach minimum safe distance. As they made their way back through the facility's labyrinthine corridors, Zara found herself thinking about the implications of their partnership. Marcus represented something entirely new in her experience, a warrior who combined honor with pragmatism, courage with intelligence, strength with adaptability. If his people were anything like him, the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Marcus, she said as they emerged from the facility into the crystal-clear night air. When this mission is complete, when we are both safely returned to our respective fleets, what then? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the distant lights of approaching rescue ships on the horizon. You know, Zara, I've been thinking about that myself. Your empire and my species, we might have more in common than either of us realizes. He looked at her with those impossibly blue eyes. Maybe it's time our peoples met properly. Behind them, the facility erupted in a pillar of fire that could be seen from orbit. But neither of them looked back. They were too busy looking forward, toward a future that neither of their peoples had imagined. A future where humanity would no longer be alone among the stars. The Zilani Imperial cruiser Wind's Grace hung in the crystalline void above Kethri Prime like a work of art made manifest in metal and energy. Its elegant curves and flowing lines spoke of a civilization that valued beauty alongside functionality, while the weapon arrays and shield generators testified to their martial prowess. Commander Zara Veltar stood on the observation deck, watching as a battered human fighter craft approached the massive vessel under escort. 3 weeks had passed since the destruction of the Korthak mining facility, and, in that time everything had changed. The rescue operation had been complicated by the fact that Marcus Chen's presence had become something of a galactic incident. Humans were unknown to the major powers of this sector, and the sudden appearance of a lone warrior who had single-handedly disrupted a Korthak invasion had sent ripples through every intelligence network from here to the galactic core. Admiral Kestrel Windward, Zara's immediate superior, had been skeptical when she submitted her initial report. An unknown alien species with apparent technological capabilities that mixed primitive kinetic weapons with advanced engineering? A warrior culture that seemed to combine honor with pragmatic ruthlessness? It sounded like the fevered imaginings of someone suffering from combat stress. Then, Marcus had agreed to demonstrate some of his equipment for the rescue team. The testing session had lasted 6 hours and had fundamentally altered the Zilani understanding of what constituted advanced warfare. Marcus's jury-rigged weapons and improvised armor outperformed military-grade equipment that had taken the Empire's best engineers decades to develop. His tactical innovations were so far outside conventional doctrine that the Admiral's strategic staff was still trying to understand the implications. But it wasn't just the technology that had impressed them. It was Marcus himself. In 3 weeks of debriefings and cultural exchanges, the human had proven to be intelligent, honorable, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that translated surprisingly well across species lines. He had also demonstrated a work ethic that put even the most dedicated Zilani engineers to shame, spending his time aboard the Wind's Grace helping to improve their weapon systems and sharing knowledge freely. Now his own people were coming to collect him, and Zara found herself dreading the moment of separation more than she cared to admit. Nervous, asked a familiar voice behind her. Zara turned to see Marcus approaching, wearing a freshly pressed Zilani uniform that had been tailored to fit his human physiology. The sight of him in imperial colors should have looked strange, but somehow it seemed perfectly natural. Over the past 3 weeks, he had become as much a part of the crew as any native-born Zilani. Concerned, she corrected, though there was fondness in her voice. Your people are an unknown quantity. We have no idea how they will react to first contact with the Empire. Marcus leaned against the observation window beside her, his expression thoughtful. From what I've told them about you folks, I think they're more worried about making a good impression than anything else. Humans have a tendency to assume everyone else in the galaxy is more advanced than we are. An assumption that our recent experiences have proven quite incorrect, Zara observed dryly. Through the reinforced transparisteel, they watched as the human vessel, a sleek warship that seemed to blend utility with barely contained aggression, took up position alongside the Zilani cruiser. The ship's design philosophy was clearly different from anything in the Empire's fleet, emphasizing adaptability and modularity over aesthetic perfection. "You see us indomitable," Marcus said, reading the ship's identification markers. "Humanity's newest heavy cruiser. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanding." His expression grew serious. "Sarah's good people, one of our best officers. But she's also extremely protective of human interests. This first contact business has everyone back home on edge." Zara could understand that. The Zilani Empire had been dealing with galactic politics for millennia, but they still approached each new species contact with careful diplomacy. For a relatively young civilization like humanity, the stakes must feel impossibly high. "Admiral Windward has arranged for a formal reception," she said. "Full honors, appropriate for greeting equals rather than primitives. Your people will be treated with the respect they have earned." Marcus smiled at that. "Equals. I like the sound of that." He paused, studying her reflection in the window. "What about you? How do you feel about all this?" It was a question Zara had been avoiding for days. The truth was, she wasn't sure how she felt about anything anymore. Working with Marcus had fundamentally changed her understanding of warfare, honor, and duty. He had shown her that there were many ways to serve justice, not all of them found in ancient codes and traditional teachings. More than that, he had become her friend. In Zilani culture, the bonds forged in battle were considered sacred, but this was something beyond even that. Marcus represented possibilities she had never imagined, a future where the Empire might not stand alone against the darkness between the stars. "I feel," she said carefully, "as though we are standing at the beginning of something momentous. Your people and mine, we could accomplish great things together." Before Marcus could respond, the ship's communication system activated. "Commander Veltar, please report to Conference Room Alpha. Admiral Windward requires your presence for the first contact protocols." Zara straightened automatically, her military training taking over. "It begins." The conference room was a masterpiece of Zilani architecture, with soaring ceilings and crystal fixtures that caught and refracted the ship's internal lighting into patterns that suggested wind and sky. Admiral Kestrel Windward stood at the head of the long table, her silver hair and lined face marking her as a veteran of dozens of campaigns. Around the table sat the ship's senior officers, all wearing their formal dress uniforms for the historic occasion. Marcus had been given a place of honor at the Admiral's right hand, his makeshift human uniform standing out among the elegant Zilani designs but somehow not looking out of place. He had, Zara realized, become one of them during his time aboard the ship. "Gentlemen, ladies," Admiral Windward began formally, "we are about to make history. First contact between the Zilani Empire and the human species represents an opportunity to forge new alliances and expand our understanding of the galaxy." Her golden eyes fixed on Marcus. "Thanks to our guest's generous sharing of knowledge, we have learned much about his people. They appear to be natural warriors with a strong sense of honor and justice, qualities the Empire has always valued." Marcus cleared his throat politely. "If I may, Admiral, there are a few things about humans that might not have come across in our conversations. We're not just warriors. We're also traders, explorers, scientists, artists. What makes us dangerous on the battlefield is the same thing that makes us valuable as allies: we adapt. We learn. We find solutions to impossible problems." The Admiral nodded approvingly. Exactly the sort of allies the Empire needs in these troubled times. The Korthak hegemony grows bolder with each passing year, and there are rumors of worse threats stirring in the outer darkness. If humanity is willing, we could offer much to each other. The conference room's main display activated, showing a real-time view of the human warship. As they watched, small craft began launching from its docking bays, not fighters, but what appeared to be diplomatic shuttles. The lead shuttle was larger than the others, probably carrying the human delegation's senior officers. Their approach vector is textbook perfect, observed Commander Talix, the ship's tactical officer. Whoever is flying that shuttle knows what they're doing. Marcus grinned. That would be Captain Mitchell. She's got about 15 years of experience flying everything from fighters to dreadnoughts. Plus, she used to be a test pilot before she went into fleet command. 20 minutes later, the human delegation was escorted into the conference room by a full honor guard of Zilani Marines. Zara found herself studying the visitors with intense curiosity, trying to understand what made Marcus's people unique among the species of the galaxy. Captain Sarah Mitchell was a woman of average height with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, but there was a warmth in her expression that suggested she was approachable despite her authority. Behind her came a small group of officers representing different aspects of human civilization: military, scientific, diplomatic, and commercial interests. What struck Zara most about them was their diversity. Where the Zilani were a relatively homogeneous species, the humans showed remarkable physical variation in skin color, hair texture, and facial features. Yet they moved together with the unity of a people who had learned to value their differences rather than fear them. Admiral Windward, Captain Mitchell said formally, offering what Marcus had explained was a human gesture of respect. On behalf of the Human Colonial Authority, I thank you for your hospitality and for the care you've shown our people. The honor is ours, Captain, Admiral Windward replied, returning the gesture as perfectly as if she had been practicing it for years. Commander Veltar has spoken highly of Specialist Chen's capabilities and character. If he is representative of your people, then humanity has much to offer the galaxy. Captain Mitchell's gaze found Marcus, and her expression softened with obvious relief. Marcus, you look well. When we received your distress beacon and learned you'd been stranded on a hostile world with unknown aliens. She shook her head. Command was preparing for the worst. Sorry for the worry, Captain, Marcus replied with his characteristic grin. But, as you can see, I fell in with good company. The Zilani are natural allies, they value the same things we do, and they know how to fight. What followed was 6 hours of careful diplomacy, cultural exchange, and mutual assessment. The humans and Zilani found themselves remarkably compatible despite their different evolutionary backgrounds. Both species valued individual courage, both had strong traditions of military service, and both believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But it was the strategic discussions that truly captured everyone's attention. When Admiral Windward explained the current galactic situation, the growing threat of the Korthak hegemony, the expansion of slaver cartels in the outer systems, and the mysterious disappearance of entire colonies in the galactic south, the human delegation listened with the intensity of people who recognized familiar problems. We've been dealing with similar issues in our sector, Captain Mitchell admitted. Pirate fleets, slaver organizations, and what our intelligence services classify as unknown aggressive contacts. We've always assumed we were alone out there, fighting these problems by ourselves. You are not alone, Admiral Windward said firmly. If humanity is willing to consider formal alliance with the Empire, we could coordinate our responses to these threats. Combined fleets, shared intelligence, joint training exercises, the possibilities are significant. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human delegation's chief scientist, leaned forward with obvious excitement. The technological exchange potential alone would revolutionize both our civilizations. Your shield generators, our adaptive manufacturing techniques, your sensor arrays, our weapons systems. Whoa there, Doc, Captain Mitchell said with a laugh. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is first contact, not a complete integration of our civilizations. But Zara could see the same excitement in everyone's eyes. The possibilities were indeed staggering. Two warrior cultures, each bringing unique strengths and perspectives, combining their efforts against the threats that plagued this region of the galaxy. It was exactly what both peoples needed. The formal negotiations would take weeks, possibly months. There would be cultural exchanges, technology transfers, diplomatic protocols to establish, and military coordination to arrange. But, as Zara watched Marcus and Captain Mitchell discussing human military doctrine with Admiral Windward and her staff, she knew that something historic was happening. Humanity was no longer alone among the stars. And neither was the Zalani Empire. The conference was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Commander Talix's voice carried a note of tension that made everyone in the room sit up straight. Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from the Kalani system. Multiple signals, all reporting the same thing: massive unknown vessels attacking colonial installations. Admiral Windward was on her feet immediately. How many ships? What's their configuration? Unknown, ma'am. The signals are heavily distorted, but, based on what we're receiving, it's a full-scale invasion. At least a dozen capital ships, possibly more. Captain Mitchell and Admiral Windward exchanged a look that needed no translation. This was exactly the sort of crisis that required immediate response, but both their fleets were days away from the Kalani system. By the time either could arrive, the colonies would be dead or enslaved. Admiral, Marcus said quietly, the Indomitable carries a full Marine battalion and enough firepower to take on a small fleet. If Captain Mitchell is willing. We're willing, Captain Mitchell said without hesitation. Human colonies have been hit by similar attacks. We won't stand by and watch others suffer the same fate. Admiral Windward smiled grimly. Then, let us see what human and Zalani forces can accomplish together. Commander Veltar, you know Specialist Chen's capabilities better than anyone. I'm assigning you as liaison to the human vessel. Zara felt her heart race with anticipation and something like joy. Working with Marcus again, fighting alongside human warriors, testing the bonds that were forming between their peoples in the crucible of actual combat, it was everything she could have hoped for. It will be an honor, Admiral. As the two fleets prepared to jump to hyperspace together, Zara found herself standing on the observation deck again, watching as human and Zalani crews worked side by side to coordinate their approach. Marcus joined her there, now wearing his own military gear again but somehow still looking like he belonged aboard a Zalani vessel. Nervous, he asked, echoing her earlier question. Excited, she corrected, and realized it was true. This feels like the beginning of something important. Marcus nodded, his blue eyes reflecting the stars beyond the window. My grandmother used to say that the best partnerships are forged in fire. Looks like we're about to test that theory. Through the reinforced transparasteel, the stars began to elongate as both ships prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed. Somewhere ahead lay the besieged Kalani system, where unknown enemies threatened innocent lives. But, for the first time in either species' history, they wouldn't face the darkness alone. Humanity and the Zalani Empire were going to war together. Commander Zara Veltar stood on the bridge of the UCS Indomitable, watching the tactical displays with growing horror as the scope of the devastation became clear. 3 colonies, home to nearly 2 million beings, were under attack by vessels unlike anything in the Imperial databases. The ships were massive, dark constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their hulls covered with organic-looking protrusions that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. Dear God, whispered Lieutenant Commander James Park, the Indomitable's tactical officer. What are those things? Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the center of the bridge, her gray eyes fixed on the main display with the intensity of a predator studying prey. Around her, human and Zalani officers worked side by side at their stations, their different technologies and techniques blending seamlessly after weeks of coordination. Whatever they are, she said grimly, they're not in any of our databases either. Marcus, any ideas? Marcus Chen looked up from the intelligence console where he had been analyzing the sensor data with Dr. Elena Vasquez and a Zalani xenobiologist named researcher Thylix. The energy signatures are unlike anything we've encountered, he reported. But, the attack patterns, they're surgical. Precise. These aren't raiders or pirates. This is organized, systematic conquest. Zara studied the tactical display with trained eyes, noting the efficiency with which the unknown vessels had positioned themselves. The 3 largest ships had taken up positions around the system's inhabited worlds, deploying smaller craft to neutralize orbital defenses while maintaining perfect formation. They move like a military force, she observed. Professional soldiers, not opportunistic scavengers. That's what worries me, Captain Mitchell replied. Professional soldiers don't usually attack random colonial systems unless they're part of a larger strategy. She turned to the communications officer. Any word from the Wind's Grace? Admiral Windward reports ready for joint operations, Captain. Both fleets are holding position at the system's edge, awaiting your orders. The past 6 weeks had seen unprecedented cooperation between human and Zilani forces. What had begun as a rescue operation had evolved into something much larger, a genuine military alliance between two species who had discovered they shared more than just common enemies. Joint training exercises had proven that human adaptability and Zilani precision could create tactical advantages that neither possessed alone. But this would be their first real test in combat against an unknown enemy. Time to enemy contact with Colonial Defense Forces? Captain Mitchell asked. 14 minutes until they reach Kalani Prime's orbital stations, replied Lieutenant Park. The outer colonies are already under bombardment. I'm reading massive energy discharges, but the weapons signatures don't match anything in our databases. Zara felt cold dread settling in her stomach. She had seen what happened when advanced civilizations decided to claim territory occupied by less developed species. The Korthak had refined it to an art form, swift, brutal attacks that left no survivors to spread word of their coming. If these unknown vessels were following similar tactics. Captain, she said urgently, we need to move now. If this is a conquest fleet, they won't leave witnesses. Captain Mitchell nodded grimly. Agreed. Communications, get me Admiral Windward. The main display shifted to show Admiral Kestrel Windward on the bridge of the Wind's Grace. The Zilani commander's elegant features were set in lines of cold determination as she reviewed her own tactical displays. Captain Mitchell, she said without preamble, my analysis concurs with yours. This is systematic conquest, not random raiding. If we don't act immediately, 2 million beings will die. Understood, Admiral. What's our tactical situation? 17 unknown vessels total. 3 capital ships roughly equivalent to our heaviest cruisers, 14 smaller craft that appear to be specialized attack vessels. Their technology appears to be biological in nature, but we have no data on their capabilities. Marcus leaned forward at his console. Actually, we might have more information than we think. He had been cross-referencing the energy signatures with every database available to both fleets. These patterns, they're similar to reports we've been getting from the galactic rim. Deep space monitors have detected vessels matching these descriptions attacking isolated outposts for the past 6 months. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her scientific analysis. The hull configurations suggest a species that evolved in high-pressure environments, possibly ocean worlds. The bioluminescent patterns might be communication methods or threat displays. Fascinating, Admiral Windward said dryly. But our immediate concern is stopping them from completing their conquest. I propose a joint assault. Human forces engage their escort vessels while Zilani ships target the capital ships directly. Captain Mitchell studied the tactical situation with the eye of someone who had spent her career turning impossible odds into victories. Negative, Admiral. That plays to their strengths, concentrated firepower against superior numbers. I suggest we try something they won't expect. She gestured to the tactical display, highlighting the enemy formation. They're positioned for orbital bombardment, not ship-to-ship combat. Their escort craft are spread thin, trying to cover 3 different worlds simultaneously. If we hit them fast and hard at their weakest point. Zara understood immediately. A human strategy, she said with appreciation. Divide their attention, force them to react instead of following their plan. Exactly. Admiral, can your ships reach this position? Captain Mitchell highlighted a point between the 2nd and 3rd planets where the enemy formation was most vulnerable. Admiral Windward's tactical staff huddled around their displays, running calculations and probability matrices. After a moment, the Admiral nodded. It's risky, but achievable. My ships can reach that position in 37 minutes if we use maximum military power. Good. Here's what we do: the Wind's Grace and her escorts make a direct assault on the enemy formation at that point. Meanwhile, the Indomitable and the human fleet approach from the opposite vector, using the system's gas giant for cover. When they moved to intercept you, we hit them from behind. It was a classic pincer movement, but with a distinctly human twist. Instead of trying to match the enemy's superior numbers through conventional tactics, they would force the unknown ships to divide their attention between multiple threats. One problem, Marcus interjected. We still don't know what their weapons are capable of. If they have something that can punch through our shields or armor, then we adapt, Captain Mitchell said with confidence that only came from years of facing impossible odds. It's what humans do best. Admiral Windward's image on the display showed the faint smile of a predator anticipating the hunt. Very well, Captain. Let us see what human tactical innovation can accomplish when paired with Zilani precision. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in coordinated military action. Both fleets moved through the Kalani system with surgical precision, their different technologies and doctrines blending seamlessly. Human ships used their superior stealth capabilities to approach undetected, while Zilani vessels prepared to engage the enemy directly with weapons that had been perfected over millennia of warfare. But it was the crew interactions that truly impressed Zara. On the bridge of the Indomitable, human and Zilani officers worked together as if they had been doing it for years rather than weeks. When Lieutenant Park needed additional sensor data, Felix provided it without being asked. When Dr. Vasquez required tactical analysis, Zara supplied it immediately. They had become something neither species had achieved alone, a truly integrated fighting force. Enemy formation is breaking apart, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the sensor station. 3 of their escort vessels are moving to intercept the Zilani fleet. The capital ships are maintaining position around Kalani Prime. Captain Mitchell studied the tactical display with satisfaction. Perfect. They're reacting exactly as predicted. She turned to the weapons officer. Mr. Chen, I want solutions on those escort vessels the moment we clear the gas giant's gravity well. Aye, Captain. All missile tubes loaded with nuclear-tipped ship killers. Point defense systems online. We're ready to party. The Indomitable burst from behind the gas giant like an avenging angel, her weapons systems immediately acquiring targets among the scattered enemy escort vessels. The human warship's opening salvo was devastating, a coordinated barrage of missiles and kinetic projectiles that struck 3 enemy ships simultaneously. But the return fire was like nothing any of them had ever seen. The unknown vessel's weapons seemed to tear reality itself, creating writhing tendrils of dark energy that reached across space to caress the human ship's shields. Where they touched, the energy barriers didn't just fail, they seemed to be consumed, devoured by some hungry force that left expanding patches of absolute darkness. Shields down to 60%. Lieutenant Park called out, his voice tight with concern. Whatever that stuff is, our defense systems can't cope with it. Evasive maneuvers. Captain Mitchell ordered. Get us out of their firing solution. The Indomitable twisted through space with the grace of a much smaller vessel, her helmsman using every trick in the book to avoid the reaching tendrils of dark energy. But there were too many enemy ships, and their weapons had range advantages that conventional tactics couldn't overcome. That was when the Zilani fleet struck. Admiral Windward's ships emerged from hyperspace directly behind the enemy capital ships, their elegant forms blazing with the cold fire of energy weapons that had been refined over 3,000 years of warfare. The Zilani understood precision in a way that few species could match, and their opening barrage was a work of deadly art. The largest enemy vessel, a nightmarish construct that looked more grown than built, staggered under the concentrated fire of 5 Zilani cruisers. Its organic hull ruptured in a dozen places, spilling bioluminescent fluid that froze instantly in the vacuum of space. But, even as it died, the ship's weapons continued to function, lashing out with those terrifying dark energy tendrils. One of them caught the Zilani destroyer's swift strike across her starboard side. Zara watched in horror as a third of the ship simply vanished, consumed by whatever force the unknown aliens wielded. The remaining 2/3 of the vessel tumbled away into space, her crew's distress calls echoing across the communication frequencies. My God, Dr. Vasquez whispered. It's not just destroying matter, it's unmaking it. reducing it to component particles and absorbing the energy somehow. Marcus looked up from his tactical console, his face grim with understanding. It's biological technology taken to its logical extreme. They don't just build weapons, they evolve them. Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened with determination. Then, we'll have to evolve faster than they can adapt. All ships, implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something the human and Zilani fleets had developed during their joint training exercises, a tactical doctrine that emphasized rapid adaptation and coordinated improvisation over fixed strategies. Instead of trying to counter the enemy's advantages directly, they would use their combined strengths to create situations the enemy couldn't predict or prepare for. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. Human and Zilani ships moved in perfect coordination, their different technologies and tactical doctrines creating a synergy that was greater than the sum of its parts. When the enemy's dark energy weapons threatened to overwhelm Zilani shields, human vessels would provide covering fire with kinetic weapons that the aliens seemed less capable of defending against. When human ships needed precise long-range targeting, Zilani sensor arrays would guide their missiles with accuracy no human system could match. But it was the ground operation that truly demonstrated the power of their alliance. While the space battle raged overhead, Marcus had volunteered to lead a joint strike team to the surface of Kalani Prime, where enemy ground forces were preparing to assault the main colonial settlement. The team consisted of human Marines and Zilani Imperial Guard working together in small units that combined their different strengths perfectly. Zara had insisted on accompanying the mission despite her official role as fleet liaison. The thought of Marcus facing unknown dangers without backup was intolerable, and she had argued successfully that her knowledge of both human and Zilani tactics made her invaluable for coordinating the operation. The enemy ground forces turned out to be even more disturbing than their ships. They were barely recognizable as living beings, looking more like animated shadows with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to absorb light. They moved with fluid grace that suggested intelligence, but their behavior was so alien that it was impossible to predict their actions using conventional tactical analysis. That was where human adaptability proved invaluable. Where Zilani doctrine called for carefully planned assaults using proven techniques, the humans simply observed what the enemy was doing and found ways to counter it in real time. When the shadow creatures proved resistant to energy weapons, the Marines switched to explosive charges. When they demonstrated the ability to phase through solid matter, the humans started using area denial weapons that made phasing impossible. Contact Front called Sergeant Rodriguez his squad's heavy weapons specialist. Multiple hostiles moving through the ruins of Building C. Zara extended her enhanced spear to full length and moved to support the human Marines, her Zilani training allowing her to anticipate the enemy's movements in ways that complemented the humans' aggressive tactics. Together, they carved through the alien forces with brutal efficiency. But it was Marcus who proved the key to victory. As they fought their way toward the Colonial Command Center where hundreds of civilians were trapped, he noticed something that neither species would have observed on their own. The shadow creatures weren't just randomly aggressive, they were protecting something in the center of their formation. There, he said, pointing toward a pulsing mass of organic material that had been attached to the command center's main power relay. That's not a weapon, it's some kind of control node. They're not trying to destroy the colony, they're trying to harvest it. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't conquest in any conventional sense. The unknown aliens were treating entire civilizations like resources to be processed and consumed. Can we destroy it? Zara asked, studying the organic construct with growing revulsion. Better than that, Marcus replied with grim satisfaction. We can turn it against them. Rodriguez, I need you and your team to create a distraction. Commander Veltar and I are going to have a little chat with our new friend's control system. What followed was 10 minutes of the most dangerous work either of them had ever attempted. While the human Marines kept the shadow creatures occupied with concentrated firepower, Marcus and Zara approached the control node using every stealth technique both their species had developed. Up close, the thing was even more disturbing. It pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, and its surface was covered with neural pathways that seemed to write with independent life. But Marcus studied it with the analytical mind of an engineer rather than the revulsion of a warrior. It's a biological computer, he realized. And, like any computer, it can be reprogrammed. He began connecting improvised interface devices to the neural pathways. Zara, I need you to watch my back while I try to crack their command protocols. For 5 agonizing minutes, Marcus worked with components jury-rigged from human and Zilani technology while Zara fought off increasingly desperate attacks from the shadow creatures. Her enhanced spear carved through their forms with elegant lethality, but there seemed to be endless numbers of them. Then, Marcus's improvised hack finally took hold. The control node convulsed as alien command codes were overwritten by human and Zilani programming. Instead of coordinating the harvest of Kalani Prime, it began broadcasting shutdown commands to every enemy unit in the system. The shadow creatures simply stopped. Their forms dissolved like smoke, leaving only empty air where moments before there had been mortal enemies. In orbit above, the enemy ships suffered similar fates. Their biological systems, dependent on the central control network, began shutting down one by one. The massive capital ships that had seemed invincible just minutes before became drifting hulks, their dark energy weapons falling silent forever. All enemy vessels have ceased hostile activities, reported Lieutenant Park, his voice filled with amazement. They're just floating there. Captain Mitchell allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. That's what happens when you bring engineers to a gunfight. Good work, people. All ships, begin search and rescue operations for survivors. The aftermath of the Battle of Kalani was sobering despite their victory. Nearly 300,000 beings had died during the brief but intense assault, and 2 entire orbital stations had been reduced to drifting debris. But the survivors owed their lives to the unprecedented cooperation between human and Zilani forces. More importantly, the battle had demonstrated something that would change the balance of power in this region of the galaxy. Alone, neither humanity nor the Zilani Empire would have been able to defeat the unknown aliens. Together, they had turned certain defeat into decisive victory. As Zara stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching human and Zilani rescue ships working side by side to evacuate survivors, she felt something she had never experienced before. Not just satisfaction at a battle won, but hope for the future. Marcus joined her there, still wearing his battle-stained armor but looking more relaxed than she had seen him since their first meeting on Kethri Prime. "Penny, for your thoughts," he asked, using a human expression she had learned during their weeks of cooperation. "I am thinking," she said slowly, "that we have proved something important today. Our peoples are stronger together than either could be alone." Marcus nodded, his blue eyes reflecting the lights of the rescue operations. "The question is, what do we do with that knowledge? This alliance we've built, it's too important to waste on bureaucracy and diplomatic protocols." Zara turned to face him fully, her golden eyes bright with possibility. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Marcus said with that familiar predatory grin, "that maybe it's time to make this official. A real alliance between our species, with joint fleets and coordinated strategies." His expression grew serious. "Because something tells me those shadow creatures were just the beginning. The galaxy is getting more dangerous, and our peoples are going to need each other if we want to survive what's coming." Through the reinforced transparisteel, the stars seemed to pulse with new possibilities. Humanity and the Zilani Empire, united not just in common cause but in genuine friendship forged in the fires of battle. It was a partnership that could reshape the galaxy itself. And, somewhere in the dark between the stars, ancient evil stirred at the news that 2 warrior species had found each other at last. Admiral Zara Veltar, recently promoted after the successful joint operations against the Shadow Fleet, as the unknown aliens had come to be called, stood in the war room of the newly constructed Nexus Station, humanity's first permanent installation in Zilani space. The massive facility orbited the strategically important world of Haven's Rest, serving as both a diplomatic center and a military coordination hub for the growing Human-Zilani alliance. The star charts displayed on the central holotable painted a sobering picture of recent events across the sector. Red markers indicated Shadow Fleet incursions, orange showed Korthak hegemony expansions, and yellow marked the activities of various pirate fleets and slaver organizations. The pattern was unmistakable. The galaxy's predators were becoming bolder and more coordinated, as if responding to some central authority. 17 separate attacks in the past month, reported Colonel Marcus Chan, his voice carrying the weight of command that came with his new position as head of Human Zilani Special Operations. His informal battlefield commission had been made permanent after their success at Kalani, and he now wore the combined insignia of both services with quiet pride. The Shadow Fleet, Korthak Raiders, and what intelligence believes are 3 different slaver cartels, all hitting targets along the Rim worlds. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, representing Human Colonial Command, studied the tactical display with the grim expression of someone who had seen too many battles. "It's coordinated," she stated flatly. "This isn't random predation. Someone is organizing these attacks to probe our defenses and test our response capabilities." Admiral Kestrel Windward nodded from her position across the table. The veteran Zilani commander had become one of humanity's strongest advocates within the imperial hierarchy, arguing successfully for increased cooperation and resource sharing. "Our intelligence networks concur," she said. "But the coordination suggests something we haven't seen before, a coalition of dark forces working toward common goals." Marcus leaned forward, studying a cluster of recent incident reports. "The pattern reminds me of something from human military history. During the Terra Wars, enemy coalitions would probe our defenses for months before launching major offensives. They were learning our capabilities, identifying weak points, preparing for something bigger." Zara felt cold dread settling in her stomach. She had come to trust Marcus's tactical instincts completely during their months of cooperation, and his concerns were never unfounded. "You believe this is preparation for a larger assault?" "I believe," Marcus said carefully, "that someone out there is very interested in what happens when humans and Zilani work together. And I don't think they approve of our success." The past 6 months had indeed been remarkably successful for the new alliance. Joint Human Zilani task forces had proven incredibly effective against various threats, combining human adaptability with Zilani precision to create tactical advantages that neither species could achieve alone. Their victory at Kalani had been followed by successful operations against Korthak installations, pirate strongholds, and Shadow Fleet incursions across the sector. More importantly, the cultural exchange had enriched both civilizations. Human engineering techniques had revolutionized Zilani manufacturing, while Zilani artistic traditions and philosophical concepts had found eager audiences among human colonies. The two species were learning from each other in ways that went far beyond military cooperation. But success, Zara had learned, often bred its own dangers. "Ma'am," interrupted Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, now serving as the station's chief intelligence officer. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the outer sensor networks. Long-range monitors have detected massive energy signatures at the edge of the Veil Nebula." The Veil Nebula was a region of space that both human and Zilani explorers had carefully avoided. Dense particle fields made navigation treacherous, while strange energy readings suggested the presence of technologies beyond current understanding. It was the sort of place where ancient evils might slumber, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "What kind of